we often focus in clinics and hemodialysis centers, we focus on the patient. Uh, Once they start dialysis, they're the ones who come to the outpatient clinics, and due to COVID, we didn't really have that ease of access with the caregivers and the families. So this has been an important opportunity for me personally to review my personal caregiving as a 58-year-old man, with my parents, with some coaching that I do for some of my friends, and also the caregiving that we've been doing in nephrology. I've been in nephrology off and on since '88 as a student, and then the past 15 years as on and off in different hospitals in London and Toronto as a dialysis frontline social worker. So this is an area that's very dear to me. In terms of the preamble, I just want to say that caregiving, the what I'm going to state, my thoughts, reflections are really a reflection of my personal experience, both as a person, as a caregiver, and as a professional. Doesn't necessarily reflect those of my colleagues or my program. In terms of an introduction, what I wanted to do is my process was to look at what is available around caregiving, specifically for dialysis community, and what is available in general in terms of caregiving, regardless of the disease-specific issue. And then talked with some of my colleagues and family members and friends that are in the middle of active caregiving for their partners or their siblings. In social work, it's still a female profession, and as a male, most of my friends, of course, are females, older females, who are now very heavy into caregiving as well. The elephant in the room is really that caregiving is not for everyone. It's a very stressful. There's a lot of conflict and loss that a person experiences. We'll talk about that. It's done in social isolation unless you reach out to peer support. This is why this program at the Kidney Foundation is so important. And also there's a huge burnout rate. Caregiving with, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then I'll show you some of the websites that I came up with, that I investigated, that actually have amazing resources, including a manual or manuals, but also standalone videos on different topics that I'm going to cover. But you can go into these online websites, and the information there is fantastic. What's necessary, though, is people to help navigate, because some of the caregivers, depending on their age group and their experience with technology, may not always be online or access it easily. So I'm hoping this will help just to point out to some key resources online. And then the other two key points is that I'm going to talk about is, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of the Caregiver Bill of Rights. I think that is the anthem to caregiving. It really speaks to the importance of self-care and what is important to survive caregiving. It's about 9 points that I'll talk about. And then there's a more recent declaration, Patient Family Caregiver Declaration, that came out in July of 2021, which I think caregivers, those are two important documents that I think caregivers need to be aware of, because a lot of the key points around self-care is embedded in those two documents. So one of the things I did is I was thinking about, when I'm doing my work, how do I conceptualize what I see, what I'm observing? And I came up with 4 categories. Underlining the caregiving relationship is really the bond. What kind of bond do you have? The strength of the bond. And is it a marital bond? Is it a child and parent, a sibling? And what is the character? What is the feel of that? So the first one is, I see families or caregiving dyads or dynamics that are very strong, committed. These folks have we attitude, and we can do, we will do. And the issue is the stress is usually outward. It's the system that's blocking us from moving forward. This is a very inspiring group of people who get things done and are incredibly committed no matter what and no matter how long this caregiving needs to go on for. They're very, very strong. Then there's the second group. again, this is on a continuum, very similar, similar kind of dynamics. The difference here is that there is a clear line that the patient or the person who's dependent kind of knows about and tries not to cross in terms of demands, because the other person has a very active life. They like to do their own thing and they get together, but they like time apart and they don't like a lot of interruptions to their daily life. Then the third group is a moderate bond. It's relatively functional, but again, it tends to be good times and there's a commitment to problem solving when tensions arise. Uh, there's a fair commitment, but once again, a lot of stress will lead people to withdraw from their family member. And then there's the fourth type, which I see, which is there's definitely a very weak conflictual bond, has been there for quite some time. And oftentimes it's characterized by people avoiding and detached from each other. And it's important for us to kind of check in. What kind of bond do I have with the person that is dependent on me now? Because you can predict some of the pitfalls or the stressors that you're going to encounter. And it's important to actually spend some time addressing addressing the bond. Is it frail? Does it need some nurturing? Do you need to sit down and have a discussion about what your expectations are? And the people who can do that upfront often do better with the over time with the caregiving demands. With kidney patients, with kidney patients, the care demand is over time, and the trajectory is one of a downward spiral. So you start off, you're stabilized, then you have an acute episode, you go down again in terms of level of care, and the frailty and so on. The frailty is one that is progressive as well. And so in the longer on dialysis, the frailty of the person on dialysis is going to increase over time, as to be expected. And of course, we forget that the caregiver, the spouse, the adult child, the sibling, the friend, depending on the age of that person, their frailty is going and fitness level and health status is also changing. So in terms of the two first groups, these very strong and strong, with guidance and education, they're off to the races. They can handle themselves fairly well. And then from time to time, they just need to come back for some coaching or some very direct focused intervention, usually around a health crisis. The last group, the weak group, which unfortunately over COVID, that became an increasing group that I had to respond to. These are folks with, in the relationship, they're either single now, divorced, widowed. Somehow, for some reasons, they've estranged themselves, or the children have estranged themselves from the parent, or unresolved family dynamics, histories of abuse sometimes. Sometimes it's to do with mental health. The elderly parent has learned to avoid or stay away from an adult child who is having some adjustment issues due to mental health addictions. The reasons can be absolutely limitless. But this group needs a lot of attention, because when pre-dialysis or during dialysis, this group, especially depending on their age and frailty, will need a lot of instrumental support. And then sometimes, depending on if they have cognitive issues, that person then needs even more support. And at that point, it's very difficult for caregivers to have these emotional charged conversations in an effective way. So in terms of the caregiving dynamic, there's the bond, and then there's the actual type of relationship that you're in. So a spouse, a relationship, a husband and a wife, it depends on the strength of that marriage, how long they were married. Was the marriage on the rocks when the health problems started? Were they living together in the same house because of finances and not because of the bond that they had once before. Oftentimes now I see a lot of couples not physically separating, but living in the same household because of finances. This is seems to be a growing issue that I see. Um, and is the age of the patient or the spouse, at the middle life, are they still raising children? Are they career focused right now in their 40s and 50s? Are they looking for that promotion and can't give up time to do the caregiving? All of these things plays a huge dynamic and concern for the caregiver and as well as the person dependent on them now. I see a lot of siblings now living together, people in their 70s or 80s moving in together or have lived together in a family home. They're single, they never married, or they were widowed. One's moved in with the other, now they're both widowed. And the issue there is in their 70s and 80s, they share the same genes. And so if it's a familial reason why they have kidney disease or kidney failure, sometimes the other person, if it's diabetes, they also have it. And so there's frailty concerns on both sides. And of course, you can think about any dynamic. It's so diverse and unique. I also see a lot of adult children moving back with their senior parents and expected now to, in exchange for housing and living expenses, to provide some instrumental personal care. And it depends on the gender, the comfort of that adult child also depends on where they are. Do they have children that's moved in as well and a spouse? Do they have to work? So it gets really complicated. And of course, the other issue is the number of people involved in the care dynamic and their finances. So gender issues, we still have a lot of gender biases around caregiving being women's work. It's changing, but I still get a lot of men saying that's my sister's job, that's my wife's job, that's everybody's job but except my own. And especially around personal care, people get very uncomfortable with body functions and so forth. Then, of course, there's employment, as I said before, where you are in your career. Are you nearing retirement? Are you starting the career? I find that younger children in their 20s and 30s who all of a sudden are asked to help with caregiving for their parent or a sibling or their spouse, their stress is even greater because now they have children, they have a job, they have a parent they care about, or they have a spouse who is now 40 and now all of a sudden starting dialysis, just have two today, and there's no money. And how are they going to survive on ODSP? So it becomes very, the instrumental needs, the frailty needs, the quality of the relationship and the bond, they all lead to a significant stress. And this is why becoming familiar with the Caregiver Bill of Rights, regardless of one's age, is really super important because it speaks to the need for self-care and kindness to oneself and boundary setting. So now in this slide, there's basically 9 points. I've paraphrased it just for the purpose of the presentation, but in a few minutes, I will actually click on the link that shows you in more detail the statement for each point. But basically, the main issue is that caregiving is valuable. It is not a selfish act to take care of oneself. It's important to seek help and require awareness of each boundary, each limitations that you have as a caregiver. Me time is critical to self-care. It's not selfish. And your mental health is critical if you're going to be providing caregiver over time, which is necessary with kidney patients. Saying no to emotional manipulation and guilt is absolutely critical. I see this all the time, regardless of the age group. We have parents who demand things of their children who are not able to provide, would like to provide, but feel that they're caught in between trying to provide for their own families and now their elderly parent. So say no to emotional guilt and manipulation is critical, both in the couple or the parent and the child or siblings. There's also this idea that because my family member is sick, I have to be patient and kind and compassionate, and I can't really say much to them, not to hurt their feelings. That's actually the opposite. You still have to maintain those bonds of a couple or a child and a parent. And the positive regard and kindness and respect is always mutual, has to be mutual. The only time that I really say, well, you really do have to understand that this is no longer mutual because your family member has now cognitive impairment. And so your expectations have to be different. But outside of cognitive impairment, I think the expectations of respect and mutuality in the relationship does not change. In fact, if you don't pay attention to that, you're going to get into significant conflict. There's also this idea that it's not real work. It's just, what I have to do. Caregiving is important. It's extremely important. Without it, we couldn't provide the chronicity of care that we now see in modern life, extension of life. We need to take pride in that. And you also have to protect your personhood, your individuality, because very quickly you start to lose sense of yourself because your time is no longer your own. And the idea of self-care is that time is probably the most important gift of all that you can give to any person is your time. Reason being is you can't take it back. So what wasn't said, wasn't done, you can't go back and undo it. And unless it takes a lot of work to go back and then do some certain things that is stated in a state of anger. And then, of course, there needs to be advocacy. We tend to say that we're client-centered. We tend to be system-centered, is my biased opinion, and we really need to move to a patient family-centered care, not just the individual or the system, but actually the patient family-centered care, because a lot of the work is actually done by the family, the caregivers, not by the hospital or by the outpatient clinics. We see you for maybe a couple of hours for in clinic, and we see you maybe 3 times a week if you're an in-center hemo patient, and we see you maybe 2-3 times every 3 months in PD clinic, and maybe some calls in between to problem solve. But usually the care is done at home in the community. So the Bill of Rights, I will bring it up for you now. And you can see that there are 9 of them. This was been around since the mid-80s. And the Family Caregivers of British Columbia, I love what they've done with this Bill of Rights because they've actually put it up in their website. And what I like about this is they've invited caregivers to add to this Bill of Rights and to make it their own, to make it personal about what is it that they need to advocate for themselves with their family member.
Jose, we don't actually see we don't see the website, just FYI.
Oh, I see it in mine when I click on the link. You don't see it?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm not sure how to fix that, but there is in the slide, there is a link to that. And I see it in mine, but it's unfortunate you can't see it on yours. But there is a link there that I invite people to go look. The other part of this is the Patient, Family, and Caregiver Declaration of Values for Ontario. This came out in July of 2021. Again, I'm afraid you can't see it when I press on the link. However, this is also an important document, and I encourage the Kidney Foundation to actually consider putting these 2 documents clearly in a link under caregiving and their website. It really talks about the importance of patient, family, caregiver having accountability, the system being accountable to them, having a sense of empathy and compassion for caregiving, and also have a transparency what the needs are in the communities that people are living in, and how easy it is to access the equity around access to care and services. This is a very important document. I know that the folks with family members in long-term care, I believe were very behind this as well, or part of the coalition that was part of this. And I think for dialysis patients or kidney patients, pre-dialysis, dialysis, transplant, I think this is also extremely important declaration of values for Ontario. And I think the Kidney Foundation should promote it and we should adopt it. I'm going to the next slide. So what does this all mean? It means that caregivers have need to and encouraged to do a lot of self-awareness and reflection. I strongly recommend the people that I work with to keep a journal to track what's going on for them emotionally, their feelings, their needs, their wants, their stress level, and important to track what are they doing on a daily, weekly basis for self-care activities. Are they taking me time? Are they taking time out for a walk? Are they taking time off to go to visit their own doctor and look after their own healthcare needs, as well as those other people that are also dependent on them, like children, other relatives, or friends that they might be involved with, and their own spouses if they're part of a relationship. It's also important to track, am I saying no when I need to say no? Am I angry because I haven't been able to establish a boundary with my spouse, with my parent, with my sibling, whoever the dependent person is? And this journaling helps to figure out what's the underlying issue that's keeping me back from saying no and not saying yes when I mean no. That is a common caregiver dilemma, is people often want to say no, need to say no, but somehow they feel that they don't have the permission to do that. And again, that goes back to relationship bonds, expectations, and how they communicate with one another. This self-awareness is basically necessary in order to be strong and self-empowered to negotiate balance in their relationship and in the caregiving itself. Self-care needs is often one of the first things to go. And people actually, there's good research that shows that caregivers often have multiple health problems, increasingly so, depending on the length of time that they're actually doing the caregiving. People skip medical appointments, annual appointments, breast cancer screening, a whole bunch of things happen. Also, they eat on the fly. They don't have time to sit down and eat properly. They don't have time to go for a walk or go to the gym. So it's really important for caregivers to track their stress level and their sleeping patterns, their energy, their motivation. Are they still committed? Why are they not committed? Why are they angry? And also their mood, their appetite, their eating habits. And some people get so foggy after months of caregiving because there's too many things coming at them and they haven't been able to get outside in the green space and clear their head. And of course, one of the key complaints I hear from some patients and their spouses or adult children or spouses that their sexual emotional intimacy changes. Um, and and that is a key thing depending on the relationship that you have with the spouse, or if you're an adult child with your own spouse. Those are important things that sometimes start to be affected, and they're not sure why this is affected, but it sometimes is connected to the stress level. So what does this all mean? Um, the assumption is that all families are healthy or possibly healthy, that we do this out of love. And yes and no. Some families and some bonds, you're doing it out of love. Other ones, not so much. It's more of an obligation. There's a cultural expectation. There's a religious expectation. The family at large is expecting that you take on the role of caregiver, especially when you are in a certain birth order in some cultures, like the eldest son who often defers to the spouse, the wife, the woman. It gets complicated. And I know I'm generalizing here, but it is important to ask yourself, am I doing this out of a strong bond, strong love, commitment, or is this an obligation? I'd rather be doing something else. Or how do I say no? How do I stop? How do I start saying no to things and demands? There's a sense of duty and responsibility that is really intense for some people. especially if they have a history where the parenting they got was rather poor or absent in some way, that one of the parent now that's needing their help wasn't actually very present for them as young children when these bonds were being formed. There's also a desire of wanting to act in the way that the kind of child you want to be, a good, caring person. Sometimes that desire to be that and all the other needs and demands on your life is very hard to reconcile. And so there's also a reluctance towards certain roles or certain functions of caregiving. Like I said earlier, personal care is one that turns off a lot of people. They don't like incontinence. They find it very uncomfortable to deal with the nudity or the need to support someone with bathing. They just get really, it triggers stuff in them, or their prior upbringing didn't allow, or there was comfort with, they didn't even see their parents kiss, never mind now having to help them with the bathing. So that can become a concern. And so there's this idea that there's responsibility versus the actual capacity within a family, within the specific assigned caregiver. We're not all natural caregivers. And we have various degrees of personal comfort with the demands of caregiving. I have adult sons who have no trouble once in a while if I get a call and say, your dad missed dialysis, can you pick him up? Sure, no problem, but it'll take me this time to get there. But if I do that on a regular basis, I get, no, I can't. I'm at work. I'm 2 hours away. The stress level then starts to grow. And then they actually stop answering my calls because they know I'm going to ask something on behalf of their parent. So there's it's easier to say no to me. So and of course, the adult that the parent will call me in social because, if I call my son, he's going to get annoyed and I don't have anybody else to call. What do I do? So there's all these dynamics around trying to maintain the bond that you do have, trying not to stress and having awareness around not stressing your spouse, your adult child, your friend, your neighbor. But at the end of the day, because dialysis is progressive and the kidney disease, the frailty increases, and the more you have trouble with transfers, getting in and out of a car, um, going upstairs, the more you depend on family to support you. And the caregiving in a community is limited. It's not even close to what people need. The personal support workers, if you're qualified these days, it's very minimal. And so when you do get it, it can be very helpful, but oftentimes people don't qualify or they need it daily and they get it 3 times a week. So we really need to advocate around respite supports in the community. I want to focus now on the losses and the mental health challenges. Caregiving on the short-term basis, an acute episode of illness, maybe a couple of weeks, a couple of months, people have enough reserve that they often can cope with that. The longer it goes, the demands and the stress level changes very, very quickly for some people, especially people with very busy lives with a lot of demands on them, not a lot of free time. They start to experience intense stress, which then can become across as passive aggressive behavior. Communication goes out the window. They're now, I see it in the hallways. I see it outside when people get picked up. I'm waiting 10 minutes. Where were you? And there's this tone of voice. There's this pressure. There's this anger. And I don't think people mean to do that because when you get to know their history, they're kind and caring, but it's just getting overwhelming. And when stress is part of the equation, people's best starts to falter. They start, their weaknesses come out and their strengths, after a while, it's hard to see. And of course, a lot of the folks with financial burdens right now, they really cannot miss work. They've through COVID, people were off work, their monies were lower, and now they're trying to get back, and there's a real pressure to not be missing a lot of work. I just need to go back one more. Okay. You can expect, and people know this if you've been in it for a while, there's a range of feelings and emotions from extremely positive to extremely negative. These emotions, if you don't risk having these challenging conversations, things get worse, not better. The bond starts to weaken. Then we start to have missed appointments to do this or that for a person who needs your care. When feelings and emotions start to fester, it leads to conflict. I've seen abuse happen, physical abuse. There's a bit of shoving going on, getting in and out of cars. I've seen it all over the past 33 years, and I've seen it progress from these loving, caring families to 5 years out, 6 years out, and that stress is really getting out of hand. There wasn't this time to call for help. People thought they could handle it. They couldn't in the end, which is always the case. And so you see a lot of unfortunate situations and dynamics happen. And of course, as a social worker, I'm not called to see the good. I'm called to see the problems and deal with the problems. So I get to see them a lot, unfortunately. And so I know that my perspective is somewhat skewed, but there's enough common patterns that what I'm saying, I think, may ring true for a lot of people, not for all. There's definitely a burden, and it impacts all aspects of one's life. At the end of the day, there's no right or wrong way to feel when you're providing care. And I think the best you can do is, if it doesn't, say and so and make other arrangements, because in the end, you risk the bond that you did have to start with. So in summary, around the conflict and dilemmas, they are to be expected. Unfortunately, it is both an opportunity to grow, but also it's if it's not addressed through good communication and timely communication ongoingly, people do draw apart. I've seen couples break up. I've seen adult children move out after a few months. I've seen other kids move in and also move out. It becomes intense. Some boundaries is one of the key areas that people always feel that they understood, but it was never actually spoken about clearly. And when it did come across, like I said before, it's often in a passive-aggressive manner, which doesn't lead anywhere but a dead end. The power in relationships, this is an area that needs a lot of attention and self-care and self-reflection. I've seen spouses all of a sudden who felt that the power was imbalanced to start with, all of a sudden now have power, because now they are functionally better than their spouse, and now they're taking charge of things. And I've seen it where that's been helpful. Other times it's payback. And the statements I hear sometimes in passing or when I'm in counseling sessions, it's really alarming, especially in relationships where there had been close to ending, or there was some abuse issues. All of these unresolved issues come back, and it can be very, very frightening. Right now, I have one case like this. The person, stepped out in the relationship. They've kind of stuck together because of finances. The wife never worked outside of the home, so she didn't have a lot of resources or felt she had options. And now the roles have reversed. The man is totally dependent on her, and she's not having it. She wants she wants to leave now. And now that she's learned about, he can go into a nursing home, he qualifies. So there's all these power dynamics and things and ugly things that come out. as well as all the good stuff that I hear about. But I often, like I said, I often see all the negative stuff that comes out, the stress, and how that changes a person's behavior. In summary, on this slide, a loss of identity, travel. If you're in your 60s, you thought you're going to be retired and traveling. Now you're not. You're stuck at home. The free time goes out the window, and your own functioning as a caregiver, your physical functioning starts to decline. And then you start to feel that all you do when you're privately is crying in the room because you don't feel you can cry in front of your spouse or your adult child that needs you. So this becomes a very self-isolating, social isolation, which is a huge determinant of maintaining one's health, is not to be socially isolated. So this is a loss. And there's also the loss around anticipatory loss or grieving. This person does not resemble the person that I once married, or that I married and raised children with and traveled with, or did whatever I did with. This is a different person. And then when you add a stroke with someone on dialysis, then you add cognitive impairment, then you have a shell of a person who is now dependent on you, but you can't even engage emotionally and have that emotional intimacy or physical intimacy that you once did. And so they become a shell of who they were. And it's very hard for some caregivers to be around that person on an ongoing basis because they're not the same person. This is like now a person that they have to care for, but that person's soul and personhood is diminished significantly. That's all sounds very depressing, and I'm afraid that as a social worker, I do see the problems, not all the good stuff that I know is going on. However, the good news is, in terms of manuals or resources, um, I'm afraid that you're probably not going to be able to see this then. Can you see that, folks, Sadia?
No, unfortunately.
Oh, no. Okay, so I'm not sure why I have a link that I see it at your end. So I'll just Um, I do, this will be shared, and I'm sure the Kennedy Foundation will share it with participants, but there are multiple general online caregiver resources, and I'll name some of them. There's the Caregiver Exchange .ca. This is an amazing resource. It gives you what they all have in common, the Caregiver Exchange, caregivers organization, Ontario Caregiver.ca, Ontario.ca, CanadianCaregiving.org, and the Ontario Caregiver Coalition, and these places, and the Family Caregivers BC and Nova Scotia. These websites provide wonderful information and short videos on everything from dealing with self-care, dealing with the healthcare system, negotiating, locating community resources specific to your area. They also have mental health focus on how to stay healthy mentally and physically. They also have resources to peer support groups online. They also have newsletters, and they also have caregiver coaching in some of the provinces. The one that I really like that we should probably try to emulate here is in the family caregivers in British Columbia, they have caregiving coaching, and you can call in or participate in small groups around specific issues to get some guidance, which is a little bit different than peer support led led groups. This is led by a social worker, I believe. And it's very targeted and focused, and in a very small group or one-on-one. I think that is the caregiver coaching is something that I would love to see the Kidney Foundation or other taking it up. I think that would be fantastic. In terms of the videos, they're short, 3 minutes or less, sometimes a little bit longer, but oftentimes very poignant. You could also click on this transcript for that video if you want to keep that or print it off. Everything from how do I express my anger? How do I draw boundaries? How do I do self-care? How do I say no? And as well as videos on actual instrumental caregiving things like bathing, transfers, etc. Especially when equipment is involved, there's lots of good videos about that. And I'm really sorry, I'm not as techy as I would like to be. I thought because I could put the link here and be able to click on it, that I thought that could, if I shared my happen, but unfortunately it has not. But I do encourage everyone that's participating today, if they can go on these websites. And my recommendation would be that perhaps the Kennedy Foundation might consider looking at these websites, and if their values align, that they have links and create a caregiver corner that's clearly smart caregiving and have these wonderful links to that.
So
There,
Jose,
yeah,
sorry, you have 5 minutes left.
okay. So I'll just move on. So basically, in summary, it all comes down to 3 to 4 things. One is you need to start this relationship and understand the bond that you have with the person that you're expected to provide care to, or that you will. You need to be able to ask yourself tough questions like, if I do this, how is it going to change my relationship with this person? Nova Scotia has a fantastic manual that I encourage people to go on, specific on caregiving. And they have these at the beginning, 101, Caregiving 101. They have these wonderful worksheets that you can look at and answer some of these questions. Um, and how does my relationship possibly change? How is my power dynamics going to change? Uh, how is it going to change with my children if I'm looking after my spouse or my parent? Um, Basically, it comes down to self-care, understanding the bond, negotiating the boundaries upfront and as things evolve, understanding that frailty is something that's going to be a constant companion. And as the person's needs physically change, or even cognitively and physically change, those are ongoing negotiations that around care and time and who else you need to bring in. So there is this idea that you have to really call out for help. Um, People often think when they start caregiving that their communication is excellent. They're very good communicators. They have good communication with their dependent person. That may be true initially, but from my experience, basically starts to go out the window with stress levels increasing. So, so I do, and that's probably an area that caregivers would do well in, to maybe have a specific um, workshop on communication skills, but how you speak to someone, the body language, the tone of voice, the pitch, the words used. Are you truly actively listening, or you're telling your parent what to do when it's time to do what? Here's your med, let's go get you to the washroom, rather than in having a dialogue and a sense of mutuality around these caregiving duties. Um, the communication tips, you really need to ask yourself and your person you're dependent on, how is our communication? Let's do a check-in, because what you think you're communicating and how the person is perceiving or feeling the impact of your tone and voice, etc., your touch, uh, I think there's a lot of gaps there, and people think they're doing something well, but in fact, they're having the opposite impact. The self-care tips, you got to call for help, and you got to establish the boundaries from day one, and it's ongoing boundaries. As the care level changes, the trajectory of care changes, you need to address these on a regular basis. Don't wait for the crisis. Don't wait for the burnout session or the crying session or the screaming session. These things do happen, and it's harder to come back from that. The other thing that people don't do, especially with chronic diseases, is really talking about future care wishes. And it's always amazing how the caregiver may in fact not be the legal substitute decision maker, because the person hasn't actually established the power of attorney document. There's a lot of confusion about the hierarchy of the substitute decision makers. We often try to engage patients and families. They all agree, and once they find out who the next person in line is, they don't want that person. But they also don't take the time to establish the document. So there's a contradiction. And I really, really, really find a lot of conflict comes up at the end of life when these things aren't addressed. And the person who is involved, the caregiver involved, often the adult child of multiple children, actually gets sidetracked by the other people who have equal say, but they haven't had those daily conversations or experienced huge conflict at the end of life. So in summary, I would really encourage people in care is you call for help. From day one, you start to feel things, don't wait, get some coaching, reach out to peer support. That really helps to normalize what's going on and give you some strategies of engagement. Adjustment is the name of the game. It's a daily, weekly thing that people have to adjust to, and that can be tiresome after a while. It's overwhelming to always change your schedule. So responsibilities and adjustments are constants, and that leads to a lot of stress. So you need to be aware of how much you can do in the day and limit your activities. The need for ongoing education and support is, I can't stress that enough. So in summary, you have to be the driver of your bus. Because caregiving happens mainly at home in the community, the healthcare team doesn't know what they don't know. And sometimes when we ask, how are you doing? And if you're not upfront about it, we think you're doing fine and we carry on. We deal with the next patient in line. So I think I'll leave it there.
How many more slides do you? Oh, yeah, that's your last slide. Go for it.
Yeah, this is the last slide. So in addition to those, and we'll find a way to make sure that those websites, the links that I had in the presentation, we'll figure out how to, I really do encourage people to go on those. These are 4 other ones. Of course, the Kidney Foundation, you know about. The Kidney Foundation, though, I would really encourage it to have a clear icon that says caregiving and not peer support. It's 2 different things. There's peer support that happens within caregiving, but peer support initially was created in the 80s, and it really targets the patients, some families, but caregiving is a very unique and needs to stand alone with links to peer support, of course. The Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence and the events down there, ways that you can reach them by email, but there's also a website and a phone number. And of course, there is in Ontario the formal support that you can ask for help. The PSW support, occupational therapy, nursing, or physio is the Home and Community Care Support Services, formerly called Home Care. Again, that is the formal system. And of course, there's a whole bunch of for private business that have caregiving assistance, but it tends to be expensive. But in terms of the main message today is when you fly, when they talk about the oxygen mask, what to do first, who to put it on first, it always says to put it on yourself first before you put it on a child or a dependent person. And to me, that's the image that I want to leave people with. I think that's a perfect image for caregiving, self-care first, and then everything else second.
Perfect. Great way to end off. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
If you want to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
So you'll have to go to the button where it says stop sharing at the top.
Okay, so it's not the share button there.
No, it's the one at the top of the Teams toolbar at the top. So not on your
Just 1 second.
yeah, I will stop recording.